Hello, everyone. Peter Waters here with Talking the Talkies. It's been 2 years since I've last posted to this YouTube channel, but I really miss making videos like this, even if they don't hit it big or anything like that. I just really enjoy talking about movies and trying to make some kind of a movie community. So here we go again. Today I'm going to talk about all of my favorite first-time watches for the month of June 2026. These are all movies that I had never seen before. I liked them, and so I'm going to talk about them. So the first movie on my list is going to be incredibly depressing. It's a documentary from 2006 called The Bridge. This movie is about the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, specifically focusing on how for a large number of years it was a go-to destination for people to take their own lives. And it interviews a lot of family members of people who have chosen to do so. It talks to survivors, and it really is this look at this bridge that has held such a mystique in all of our lives for so long. I always think about the movie Vertigo from Alfred Hitchcock and that iconic shot of the bridge. But I don't know if after watching this documentary I can ever look at it the same way again. It's very chilling. It has come under fire ethically, because it does show people on the bridge and at their worst moments. Personally, though, I thought it was a very effective look at this crisis. I thought the movie was a very sobering examination of something that needs to be talked about and should not be as taboo as it is. Next up is the latest film from director John Carney. His movies typically are dramedies that infuse music and musicians into the film. This one stars Nick Jonas and Paul Rudd as two musicians. Paul Rudd, he is in a wedding cover band singer sort of person who never really lived out his rock star dreams, and Nick Jonas plays this hot young new artist, and they share the stage one night and they get to a songwriting session after hours after this wedding that they perform at, and they're really vibing with it. But then years later, wouldn't you know it, that the song that they co-wrote together, he hears on the radio, the Paul Rudd character, and the rest turns into a sort of big fat liar situation where he is trying to prove that he is the rightful songwriter of the song. It's very cute. It has good music in it, but if you're into that kind of genre, feel-good movies about musicians where you might laugh a little, you might cry a little, but not too hard in either direction, Power Ballad is another solid entry in the John Carney wheelhouse. Also recommended Sing Street and Once, and pretty much everything he makes is pretty consistent and solid. All right, let's swing back to really depressing, upsetting documentaries for a moment with Michael Jackson, The Verdict. This is on Netflix currently, and this is about the trial of Michael Jackson for all of his alleged crimes with young children and his sort of creepy relationship with them, sleeping in bed with them, and things like that. There is a reason why I have yet to see the Michael biopic that is currently in theaters. Despite the bad reviews, I wasn't planning on watching it anyway, knowing it was going to whitewash Michael Jackson and all the things he did. So I'm glad that this has resurfaced. I do think it is a typical true crime Netflix sort of documentary, but I thought it was still fascinating and upsetting and interesting to learn about. And I'm glad that all sides of the story are being told, not just the ones that make him look like the king of pop. All right, the next movie I recommend is Wild, literally. It is a movie from 1981 called Roar, and it stars Tippi Hedren, most famous from Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, and she and her then husband basically lived in Africa amongst a bunch of lions and wildlife, and they essentially made this movie with very little safety regard for its actors, and it has since been known as one of the most dangerous films of all time, with some astronomical amount of injuries. There was at one point that Tippi Hedren was said to have had her scalp grazed by lion teeth. At one point in this movie, she pours honey over herself, and the lions are right there. The story, there's not really much of a story to it. It's the husband is trying to prevent poachers from poaching the lions while he's trying to meet his family. And it's basically an excuse for increasingly dangerous behavior with these lions. you cannot help but watch in fascination and in kind of terror as these actors put themselves in danger's way. And the footage is just, you never will see a movie like it. No CGI whatsoever, real lions and people being dangerously close to them. It's fascinating. Next up is another really feel-good movie from 2006. This is called Akeelah and the Bee. This is about a young inner-city girl who doesn't believe in herself, doesn't think she will amount to anything, but she is really good at spelling things. She loves word games like Scrabble, and she's inspired by her teachers, soon a mentor character played by Lawrence Fishburne, and she competes against the best and brightest students at the National Spelling Bee. As somebody who has a lot of nostalgia watching those old spelling bee competitions on TV, on ESPN no less, and just as a human being who appreciates a good story, a very underdog story of somebody learning to believe in themselves, I thought that this was a really heartwarming, a sweet film that pretty much anybody could enjoy. All right, my next recommendation, if you need a good laugh for yourself, is the latest comedy special from Patton Oswalt called Tea and Scotch. And I've been a longtime fan of Patton Oswalt. I've never seen him live, but I've seen pretty much every comedy special that he has put out. And this one is just as funny. I really enjoy his sense of humor. I enjoy that he is a fellow cinephile. And in this particular special, he talks about trying to introduce his daughter to the original 1978 John Carpenter classic Halloween, but to not the reaction that he was looking for as somebody who has shown many people many of my favorite movies and often am disappointed in the reaction. It really struck a chord with me, and he's just one of the best stand-up doing it. All right, my next recommendation is yet another incredibly depressing documentary. It is called Maternal Instinct, and it is on Netflix currently. And I don't want to spoil things, but this true crime documentary starts out with a woman in complete duress. She is pulled over by the police, and she has a baby that was just born with the umbilical cord still attached in her lap. She's desperate to try to rush to the hospital. And so, escorted to the hospital by the police, they go into the room. She's inspected by a doctor, and the doctor says, "That woman did not just give birth. That cannot be her baby." And it goes from there. And I found it to be one of the most disturbing things that you could watch, and I was left utterly fascinated by the psychology of all of the people involved, why they did what they did, and it's just one of those unbelievable true stories, as upsetting as it is. Next up, I watched an old Western from 1973 called Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. This stars James Coburn as Pat Garrett, who has a rivalry with Billy the Kid. I really liked their kind of relationship in it, where they're kind of respect each other, but they're also enemies, and they're always after each other. It was a really classic, sort of gritty Western, and if you're into that genre, you'll really like it. I also am not a huge fan of Bob Dylan, but he stars in the film and wrote a lot of the music, and the music, I have to admit, is incredible. I had no idea that Knockin' on Heaven's Door originally came from the soundtrack to this movie, and the scene in which that takes place is this really poignant film when a character is passing away, quote, knocking on heaven's door. And I thought it was just a really effective Western that gets to the heart of what makes a lot of really classic Westerns work, which is that lawlessness and the blurred lines between who's right and who's wrong and things like that. Next up, I saw the recent Toy Story sequel, Toy Story 5, in theaters. And even though I would rank this as my least favorite Toy Story film so far, that's still saying a lot because I love all of these movies. This movie I was really excited for because the toys take on technology. All of the kids in the entire neighborhood are addicted to their tablets and ignoring their toys, and they have to figure out how to, become relevant yet again to the kids' lives and make it so Bonnie, the young girl, is not bullied by people online as well. I really wish it went a little bit farther with how it examines the effects of technology on modern kids, especially because it's directed by Andrew Stanton, who brilliantly looked at how technology is affecting us in Wall-E, one of my all-time favorite Pixar films. But still, I thought it was yet another amusing Pixar film. There's a lot of humor in it. There's a lot of heart in it. There's one scene with Jessie in particular that is really poignant that a lot of people are talking about online. But it does feel like they are artificially extending the lifespan of both these toys and the film series in general, ironically. So I have mixed feelings on it, but ultimately I did like it. It's just my least favorite Toy Story film. And the next movie I recommend is from 1988. It's called Miracle Mile. And this film stars Anthony Edwards, I believe his name is. He played Goose on Top Gun. And he plays this guy he's kind of a goofy dude, and he's really into this one girl. And he has plans to go on a date with her at this diner, but wouldn't you know it, his alarm doesn't wake him up in time and he misses her. So he winds up at the diner, but just super late. It's like 4 a.m. when a nearby phone booth rings, and he just happens to pick it up. And on the other end is this very frantically voiced man who is basically saying to him that the world is going to be destroyed in just under an hour. Nuclear bombs are headed your way. Please seek shelter and help. He thought he was calling somebody else. He hangs up, and instead of what most of us would react like, which is, oh, that's crazy, just a crazy person, he takes this as absolutely serious, and so he tries desperately to warn everyone in the diner about their impending doom. And from there, the film just gets crazier and crazier and crazier. I thought that this was a really good film that was in the sort of exploitation genre, the sort of cheesy 80s horror movies that I really enjoy, like Reanimator, things like that, in that sort of style. It also stars the guy who played Bubba from Forrest Gump in it. He has a very funny role. There's a whole who's who of character actors in this thing. Like, I recognized like half the people in it, but I didn't know their names. One of those, oh, that guy who was in such and such. So if you want a sort of fun, low-budget, end-of-the-world, possibly thriller, then check out Miracle Mile. Alrighty, we have to swing the pendulum back to something super depressing. My next movie I'm going to recommend is 1997's The Sweet Hereafter. This is a movie about a small town who lost a number of children in an accident involving a school bus swerving out onto the road and crashing into a frozen lake, and the fallout of that. We primarily focus on one character played by Ian Holm. He's this lawyer who's going around and trying to convince all the families who are desperate to just move on from this tragedy to go into this trial to try to get money from whoever they can, either from the bus manufacturers or whoever. He's basically trying to manipulate these families into getting as much money as possible. It's a very complicated, subtle, very, very sad film, but I thought it was expertly done, and the acting was excellent, and there's just this very palpable heaviness to it. So it is not something to put on lightly, but it was a fantastically produced film about grief. I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of kind of disturbing documentaries on my list, and this next one is no exception. This is from 2013. It's called The Cheshire Murders. It's an HBO doc, and it chronicles a home invasion that goes horrifically, horrifically wrong that resulted in multiple casualties. It's one of the most disturbing things I think I've ever seen, and I know I said that about some of the other movies I saw, but this one, I think, is probably the most disturbing of what I saw in June, at least, and it is not recommended for the faint of heart. However, it was fascinating, it was chilling, I was riveted by it, and yeah, it makes you appreciate your own life and the fact that many of us will never have to experience something the way this family did. Alrighty, my next film is called A Simple Plan from 1998. Sam Raimi directed it. He's one of my favorite directors. He did the first few Spider-Man films. He did the first few Evil Dead movies. He is just one of the best directors ever, in my opinion. Very over-the-top style. most of the time. However, A Simple Plan is sort of an outlier in his filmography. It is much more quiet, much more subtle, very much feels like a Fargo-type Coen Brothers movie. And it involves these three guys who are buddies, and they are in a small town in Minnesota. And on a random trip, they happen across a plane that is filled with over $4 million in $100 bills. And they make a pact with each other. Okay, we're going to pretend that we never saw this. We're going to hold the money, and we're going to wait for this to blow over. If nobody finds this plane, then we'll split the money and we'll be rich and we'll be happy, right? Well, very much you know right from the beginning that this plan, this simple plan, is going to go very awry, especially because even though we have the Bill Paxton character who's appears a little bit more with it, his two friends, one of whom is played by Billy Bob Thornton, you know he's very much like a hillbilly type who doesn't think about what he's saying, and you just know it has bad written all over it. So I really enjoyed this. I thought it was very much, if you enjoy movies like Fargo, this is right up there with that kind of movie. Alrighty, you guys, I might sound like a broken record, but my next movie recommendation is a Hulu true crime documentary called Devil in the Family. And this is about that family that went viral on TikTok and YouTube and all that. They were the seemingly perfect family, and wouldn't you know it, they had a lot of dark secrets. There is especially a twisted relationship that the picture-perfect mother tries to have with their family therapist that goes to extremely twisted degree, and it was very hard to watch at times, but again, I could not look away from this horrible tragedy that was unfurling slowly but surely. It tells its story over 3 episodes, and it just kind of gets worse and worse and worse. It starts off as she's just kind of like this controlling mom, but hey, the family videos are racking in all kinds of money and views, so it must be good, right? But it just spirals out of control. I just thought it was a fascinating window into our modern relationship with families and what we post online. Where is that line? Should we be posting all these things with our kids in it? We don't know who are watching these things. And also, it's like free child labor, you know? They should just be playing in the yard at times. They shouldn't be working for you, the parents. So it was a very interesting look at our modern culture, and it was also a very tragic story that was hard to look away from. Alrighty, my next movie that I enjoyed this month was called The Doom Generation from 1995. This is from the director Greg Araki, and it very much feels like a 1990s specifically independent film. Very much in the spirit of Natural Born Killers, it is about these 3 wayward youths who just basically go around from hotel to gas station to here to there aimlessly, and they sleep with each other and they murder people, and it's very colorful and crazy and wild and bizarre and definitely not for everybody, but it captures a certain kind of 1990s wayward youth movement. I'm thinking of like MTV and like the Jackass generation, people like that, where they just seem to have no direction in life. Yeah, the Doom Generation kind of weirdly artistically captures that in its violent ways. So I enjoyed it, but I don't know, it would take a very specific type of person to recommend it to. The next movie I recommend is from the year 2000. This is another super low budget documentary called Dark Days. This movie is about the homeless population in New York who specifically lived in the subway system. They literally had like little makeshift houses. They cooked dinners there. They just lived their entire lives, almost like the Penguin from Batman Returns living in the sewers, but these were real people. It was very tragic, of course. You hear a lot of their stories. The director hasn't made anything since this film, which is very fascinating to me, but he chose to live with this population for about 2 years and even gave them access to the film equipment. So it's really this population of homeless people just barely scraping by, telling their own stories. And even though the movie ultimately shows some hope for some of the people, they did get housing, I just think about the modern day and how more and more people are falling on hard economic times, and there's less and less places for them to go. And you just never know what people are living through, sometimes literally right underneath you. The next film on the list is called Monster. This is a Japanese film from the director Koreeda, I believe you pronounce it. And this is a non-linear film that is told from multiple different perspectives. We follow the single mother whose son is exhibiting some strange behavior. He's like cutting his hair off in the sink, and he's not telling her where he is. He's hiding in a train tunnel. And she suspects that it has something to do with his teacher at school. So she sets up a meeting with the administrators and the teacher, and they kind of blow her off. They don't really acknowledge the fact that something might be going on, and they're sort of just saying, we're sorry, we'll do better next time. She's unsatisfied with it. So she takes matters into her own hands and tries to investigate it, and it goes on from there. So we see this story from the perspective of the mother, then the teacher, then the son, and with each new person, we learn a new layer. Kind of like the recent horror movie Weapons, I really enjoyed how you kind of learn the different sides of whatever happened with this kid. It also has a really great music score from Ryuichi Sakamoto, I believe is his name. He's a Japanese piano player. His piano music is just so emotional and subtle and really holds the film together as well. It's a very emotional film. I thought with a title like Monster, I was expecting maybe something else. You know, the true crime person in me is always primed for some sort of serial killer sort of thing. But no, this movie was more of a tender portrait of humanity than maybe I was expecting, although that is Koreeda's bread and butter, is movies like that. The next film on my list was one of the few remaining Best Picture winners I still need to see. This is from 1987. It's called The Last Emperor, and this film is an epic about the life of Pu Yi, I believe his name is, and he was indeed the last emperor of China, and I thought this was a fascinating biopic of this man who pretty much had it all and then lost it all. He started off as this child emperor, and it was a fascinating insight into that whole thing. It shows him as a baby and as a young toddler and all the sycophantic people that are just doting on him all the time, even to the point of sniffing his own droppings to make sure he was healthy, things like that. And they will do anything to please him. And then as politics change and times change, and then the emperor system doesn't really happen anymore, forces beyond his control force him to change, and he eventually winds up as a prisoner of war. And it was just a fascinating look at a culture at a time period that I didn't know much about, and I really liked it. It also has a magnificent music score from Ryuichi Sakamoto, who also did the movie Monster, and I just thought that this was everything a, quote, epic biopic should be. A lot of people complain that it's Oscar bait sort of stuff, but if Oscar bait is made with this level of care and period detail, and they actually shot in the ancient Forbidden City in China, which is rare for a film to do, I thought it was just a magnificent production. The next movie is a 2006 documentary called Wordplay. This is a movie about people who are obsessed with doing crossword puzzles. It interviews a few celebrities, including Bill Clinton, Jon Stewart of The Daily Show, and a bunch of others, but mostly it focuses on these people who do crossword puzzle competitions every year in Stamford, Connecticut. It talks about how people create crossword puzzles. And as somebody who wakes up every morning and does Wordle and the New York Times Connection game, I really am someone who loves puzzles, and I also host trivia, things like that. So this was a documentary right up my alley, and I just loved the celebration of nerddom that this documentary was. So definitely, even though it's 20 years old and nobody reads newspapers with crosswords in it anymore, I thought it was a really fun documentary with a lot of eccentric crossword devotees in it. Alrighty, my next recommendation is sort of part best of clips, part new movie. This is called Jackass Best and Last, and this follows the group of daredevil lunatics who put their bodies in harm's way for their own and our enjoyment. For over 20 years, this group has been putting their bodies on the line. I think that this group is the spiritual successor to people like Evel Knievel and Stunt People and Buster Keaton all the way back in the 1920s. Although I can understand why watching people inflicting pain on themselves might not appeal to everybody, I find it this fascinating look at these wannabe stuntmen who are willing to push their bodies to the extreme for our entertainment. And they do it with a smile on their face, and they do it with a sense of camaraderie that is infectious. And it really is the end of an era. Throughout the film, Johnny Knoxville, who is the main ringleader of the Jackass franchise, he gets choked up a number of times, knowing that this really is the last time that they are going to do this, even though it's not really a full movie. Their bodies just literally cannot take what they do to it anymore. They are getting older. With his shock of white hair, he's just not the young man he used to be anymore. So he cannot go in the ring literally with a bull that will throw him around like a rag doll anymore, unfortunately. But this was a weirdly poignant send-off, even though, again, half of it is stuff you've seen before if you have been following this franchise for long enough. But I still thought it was entertaining. All right, and that brings us to the last recommendation, and also this is my pick of the month. This is a movie from 1995 with a very unwieldy title, To Wong Foo, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar. And this was recently re-released into theaters in AMC for their Pride Month series, and it follows 3 drag queens who are on a road trip from New York to Hollywood after winning a competition, a drag show competition. However, they're waylaid in this hillbilly middle America town in the middle of their journey, and it's the type of people that will not take kindly to men wearing women's clothing. I thought that this movie was a really heartwarming, funny comedy, and especially for 1995, I thought this was a pretty bold look at this subculture that even today is very much criticized by a lot of people. Unlike a lot of older films like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner or West Side Story, things that had like mixed race couples, nowadays you watch it and you think, oh, how quaint. Isn't it wonderful how far our culture has come where we don't really think about mixed race couples anymore as being like a major thing. Or even divorce. Divorce in the 1950s was a huge scandalous ordeal, but now we recognize that, divorce can sometimes be a healthy thing. However, I think even 30 years out from this film, I think you could still remake this movie today where you have intolerance over transgender individuals and drag queens. And I think if more people watched movies like this, then the world would be a happier place. I loved the 3 main characters. They're played by Patrick Swayze, John Leguizamo, and Wesley Snipes, and they're all super sassy. They're all divas, and they have this sort of camaraderie that reminded me of the Golden Girls. It was very fun to watch, and I really love how slowly but surely they kind of win over this town who are all looking at them with one eyebrow raised, like, who are these people who are coming in here? But all it takes is communication. Once you realize that the people that you're talking to are not monsters who are trying to convert you, they are nice people who actually have, life experience to help you grow and become a better person for it. I think that this movie is very powerful in its quirky way. I definitely think it deserves its cult status, and I think that's why it's my pick of the month. So I hope you enjoyed learning about all my recommendations. There were 21 total recommendations, which is kind of a lot, but I have been out of the game for a little bit. I have not posted a video in roughly 2 years. So hopefully I can do this more regularly. And yeah, maybe I'll do some more videos, things like that. And I hope you enjoyed watching. Thanks so much and hope to see you soon.